The kitchen holds its breath. Under the dim light, a person stands still at the sink. Their fingers curl around the cold porcelain edge, as if steadying themselves for a decision. Piled in front of them are dishes from days ago, untouched, a quiet monument to everything that has felt impossible. Today, after staring for a long time, their hand reaches out, picks up a single spoon, and turns on the water. The question that will echo through this story is not about the spoon itself, but about why this tiny act feels so enormous. Maybe you have been there, or you have watched someone you love face a similar standstill. The common advice is to take a break, think positive, or set a big goal to give your life direction again. But when the weight of recovery presses down, big goals can feel like mountains you have no strength to climb. So why does anyone ever start to climb again? And why do they so often begin with something absurdly small? This is the hidden architecture of rebuilding a life, the small win. Not a burst of willpower, not a sudden epiphany, but a single intended action completed. And to understand its power, we need to first explore what recovery actually demands from a mind that has been depleted. When a person is in the grip of a deep crisis, whether from depression, burnout, or loss, the mental circuits that initiate action can go quiet. Tasks that once felt automatic, like washing dishes or answering a message, suddenly require a mountainous energetic cost. The brain, trying to conserve resources, walls off effort, leaving behind a heavy inertia known as severe amotivation. The most natural response is to wait until you feel motivated again before you act. That strategy seems logical, but it contains a trap. Motivation often does not arrive first. It arrives after a small success. This is the first reversal. The direction that feels correct, waiting for the big feeling, is exactly what keeps the paralysis in place. Small wins exploit a different pathway. They do not depend on pre-existing motivation. They generate it as a consequence. The spoon, once washed and dried, did not clean the entire kitchen. Yet it did something more important. It contradicted the silent mantra of "I cannot." Psychologists call this a mastery experience, and it is one of the strongest sources of what is known as self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the quiet belief in your own ability to do what needs to be done. It is not self-esteem or confidence in a general sense. It is the specific, evidence-based conviction that you can produce a particular result, and that conviction often lies shattered after a crisis. Every small win, no matter how trivial it looks to an outsider, deposits a grain of evidence against the story of complete helplessness. Yet here is the subtle trap. The same mind that was hurt also filters the evidence. After washing the spoon, a quiet voice might whisper, "That is nothing. You are still a mess. This proves nothing." This voice is an expression of a cognitive distortion called all or nothing thinking, where only perfect outcomes count. It tells you that if you did not conquer the whole day, you did nothing at all. It erases partial effort. And so the small win can be mentally thrown away the moment it is achieved, robbing you of its restorative effect. But psychological science has revealed something remarkable. The brain does not require you to believe a success is huge for it to register. Even if you dismiss it, completing a chosen task still sets off a cascade of neurochemical signals tied to reward and forward motion. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter often linked to pleasure, is actually more about the anticipation of reaching a goal and marking progress. When you intended to wash that spoon, and then your hand moved and completed the act, a small burst of dopamine was released in key motivation pathways. This pulse does not care about the size of the task. It cares about the completion of an intended action. It says, "I did what I set out to do." In a brain that has been starved of such signals for weeks, that tiny pulse is like a drop of water on parched soil. The spoon is now clean and glinting on the drying rack. What happens next is perhaps even more important. Your hand, still holding the cloth, might find it easier to pick up the next thing. A cup, a plate. This is behavioral momentum, the principle that starting an action lowers the resistance to continuing it. Physicists talk about inertia. An object at rest stays at rest, but once it begins to move, it takes less energy to keep it going. Behavior follows a similar pattern, especially when it has been frozen by depression or anxiety. The hardest part was breaking the stillness. That is why the spoon was everything. Behavioral activation therapy, one of the most effective treatments for depression, is built on this very insight. It does not ask someone to feel better first. It asks them to do a tiny, scheduled action, and then another, letting the feeling follow the doing. So, the small win is not just a psychological trick. It is a technique that physically re-engages the brain's motor and reward systems. But what if you wash the spoon and feel absolutely nothing? No tiny spark, no sense of relief, just a hollow emptiness. This is a hallmark of severe anhedonia, the lost ability to experience pleasure or reward, and it can make small wins seem pointless. Here, the evidence offers a more nuanced hope. The behavioral completion still counts, even without the conscious feeling of reward. Over time, with repeated small scheduled actions, the brain's reward system can gradually regain its sensitivity. So you do not need to feel the win for it to be doing the deep, silent work of recovery. This separates the objective behavioral change from the subjective emotional experience. Both are important, but they do not always move in sync. The isolation that comes with psychological pain can make social contact feel frightening and exhausting. So the small win extends from the private world of your kitchen to the fragile threads that tie you to other people. Let us return to the person we first met, now a few days into their slow and careful experiment. They have been keeping a list: washed spoon, made bed, stepped outside for 1 minute, replied to 1 message. The list is crumpled and private, not for anyone else. It is a log of tiny rebellions against an invisible prison. Then comes a morning when everything collapses. They open their eyes, and the weight is back, as heavy as ever. The motivation to move has vanished. They lie still, and the old voice returns. See, nothing has changed. You are still broken. This moment is the true test of the small win. In the old pattern, this would be the end of the attempt. But something is different. A quiet counter voice, backed by evidence, murmurs, "You did wash that spoon. You did make the bed." It is not a loud, triumphant rebuttal, but it is a crack in the armor of the absolute negative thought. The small win has created what psychologists call a disconfirming memory, a piece of data that does not fit the story of total failure. This memory does not make the pain disappear, but it makes the conclusion, "I am incapable," less watertight. That is the radical function of the small win. It builds a counter-narrative, one tiny, undeniable fact at a time. The person in bed is not magically cured, but they now know, deep in their bones, that they have done something before. So doing something again is possible. This is the foundation of hope, not a wish, but an expectation based on a personal track record, however modest. Recovery is not the absence of bad days. It is the growing ability to hold the bad day and the small win in the same mind without the bad day erasing the win. So the spoon, the made bed, the sent message, these are not mere tasks. They are votes cast for a new identity. Each small completed intention is a vote that says, "I am a person who can act." And identity is built by the accumulation of such votes. The critic inside might scoff that these votes are too small to count. But in the mind's electorate, there is no minimum threshold for truth. The brain's narrative centers do not deal in absolutes. They tally frequencies. The more you do, the stronger the story becomes. This explains why large, distant goals so often fail during recovery. They offer no immediate votes, only a long wait with frequent reminders of inadequacy. The spoon, in all its mundane silence, achieved what hours of self-criticism could not. It cracked the airtight story that had become a cell. That story said, "You cannot do anything. You are helpless. "You will always be this way." And the spoon said, "That is not entirely true. I was dirty, and now I am clean. You did that." One small act of agency punched a hole in the wall of despair, and through that hole a different kind of air entered. It was not the air of a permanent recovery. It was the air of possibility, the first breath of a self that could still affect the world. This is why small wins matter during recovery. They are the only counter-evidence that the brain will believe. They do not require faith. They require only the simple, undeniable fact that an intention was formed and fulfilled. And from that single building block, a new architecture of a life begins, not in a grand blueprint, but in a pile of tiny, honest accomplishments. Now, if we return one more time to the kitchen, the scene looks physically different. The sink is empty. The dish rack holds clean cups. There is a small sticky note on the wall with a short list of crossed-off items. But beyond the physical change, something more profound has shifted: the meaning of the empty sink. It no longer represents a monumental victory over depression. It is simply an accumulation of small acts. The person who washed that first spoon is the same person who later washed the fork, the plate, the pan. The small win did not make them a different person. It reminded them of who they were before the darkness convinced them otherwise. But they are a compass. When lost in the fog of cannot, a small win points north, and even a few steps in that direction change everything. The beauty of the small win is that it is always available, even on the worst day. You can almost always do one thing. That one thing might be washing a spoon, drinking a glass of water, or just sitting up in bed for 30 seconds. And when you do it, you are not just performing an action. You are reclaiming a fragment of your agency. Over time, these fragments cohere. The person in recovery learns to trust the process rather than the feeling. They learn that action precedes motivation, that identity follows behavior, and that the heaviest doors open with the smallest keys. So if you ever find yourself or someone you love standing at a sink of overwhelming tasks, remember the power of the single spoon. Change does not require a giant leap. It begins with the smallest possible reach, the tiniest completed yes in a sea of no. And sometimes that is more than enough.